Good morning, friends. Our speaker this morning is Mr. S. Gopalan, and Gopalanji doesn't need any introduction in this circle. He has been with us for a number of times, has spoken and also participated in our programs. Only thing I can say about Mr. Gopalan is that he has been associated with the Valley School and Prestige Teachings for more than 4 decades. He has written a number of books on his insights, experiences of case teachings. So I'm very happy to welcome him once again this morning and want to thank him for coming to our rescue and be with us today before the Indore Circle. And Mr. Gopalan is going to talk to us on information is not understanding, living is. I think the topic is very interesting and it says all. So we are really eager to hear Mr. Gopalan on this theme. Welcome, sir, and you can go ahead with your theme. Unmute yourself. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Dubeji. As usual, I would like to be challenged on what I say. What I'm talking about today is based on the fact that I've just completed this manuscript of a book which is entitled Begin from the Other End. And Begin from the Other End comes in the chapter part 10 Europe of The Only Revolution. It's a conversation between a friend of Krishnamurti and Krishnamurti as this friend tries to explore how to cross this ocean of confusion that he is in. Now, this entire chapter is quite short. It's just about 2.5 pages. And through the entire discussion and conversation, the whole thing centers around just the approach of the friend and Krishnamurti's approach. The friend begins and saying that he's tired of this analysis, examination, and methods. They only have deepened his confusion. He doesn't know what to do, which way to proceed. And Krishnamurti's response is, so long as he's doing that, that is how it would be. But if the mind lives from the other end, these problems will not exist. And then for the rest of the discussion, through the chapter, the friend responds, how? How can I do this? I can only go to what I know. Do I really understand the suggestion? It seems meaningless. This is the response of the friend right through. And through the passage, Krishnamurti 3 times emphasizes living. And he keeps saying at the end, all knowing is on the wrong side. If you know, you are already in the grave. So, my sense was that you and I, all of us, are in exactly the same boat. And one of the reasons for that is the lifestyle, the society, but most importantly, the education that we have come through. This has encouraged analysis, it has encouraged examinations, it has encouraged grave methods. Neither education, living, nor society talk about living itself. So the questions that come to me from this are, in what ways is living different from thought, intellect, knowledge? Second question is, can living be separated at all from thought, living, knowledge, from thought, intellect, and knowledge? In common experience, all the activities of a human being are inseparable from his thought and intellect. So then the question comes, what is the difference between analysis, examination, and methods and living itself? Why do Krishnamurti and his friend seem to be talking from completely different planes? Now, analysis examinations, methods, they are all activities of the intellect. So the question that comes is living also an activity of the intellect? So let's begin very closely with what we know, terms that we know and are very familiar with: information, knowledge, hypothesis, and experiencing. What exactly do we mean by these terms? So information is data. It is facts that are discrete and separate from one another, not necessarily connected. So, for example, Bangalore is the capital of Karnataka, is a piece of information. Latitude is the angular distance of a place north or south of the equator, another piece of information. Now, when information is associated, it becomes knowledge. So if we say Bangalore is the capital of Karnataka and its latitude is 13 degrees north, then both these pieces of information have got associated and they have become knowledge. The consequence of this knowledge is that there is a hypothesis, imagination, or a conclusion, which is an inseparable activity of the activity of thought. So when we say Bangalore is capital of Karnataka and its latitude is 13 degrees north, immediately our intellect says, therefore the climate of Bangalore must be tropical. We already have this information in the back of our mind. What is a tropical climate? We associate the knowledge that we have with this third piece of information and we make a conclusion that the climate of Bangalore is tropical. Now, generally, when we say experience, what we mean is the impression of that experience, of that event. Now, does that impression happen at the time of the event or is it after the event? So, is living then the act of experiencing even before the impression of it has been made? And the impression of that contact, that event becomes what we call experience, which is part of our information and knowledge. Now, modern education for the last 100 years or so has more or less indoctrinated us to believe that the act of learning is accumulation of information and knowledge. Hence, the act of experiencing is not differentiated from the impression of that act which is recorded as information or knowledge. Now, in the construct of a school system or an education system, it is easier and faster to memorize the impressions of experience of others than to actually discover those things for them ourselves. And therefore, the rote system of education relies on the information which is based on experiences of others, but places very little emphasis on understanding and experiencing of the student himself. The essence of this experiencing, if we look at it very closely, is a perception that happens while the event is happening. So while an event is happening, the totality of the human being, his body, his brain, his mind, his layers of consciousness, everything is immersed in it. There is no knowledge or recognition of the separate elements when the event is happening. An instant later, thought arises and it tries to capture this impression and articulate about it. Now, when thought arises, this perception is clouded over and obscured. there is a simile that we can use to understand this entire process, and that is the simile of a clear pond on a windless day when you can see through the water and be able to see the pebbles and the sand at the bottom of the pond. If a stone is thrown into that water, it creates a splash, waves. The water is no more still. And in that movement of that water, the bottom of the pond is no more visible, but it hasn't disappeared anywhere. It is where it is. It has not moved. So, is it that our thought is ruffling the waters of living and therefore obscuring our perception? Is thought, intellect required at all to experience any event, that is to perceive any event? Or thought, intellect is only required to make an impression of it and recall it? Then the question comes, why is thought required to recall experience at all? No, knowledge has its place. And we learn, that's the only way we learn. So we don't have to learn every time that you can be burnt by a fire. The knowledge of it happening once is useful, even for protection of the human being. But is knowledge also an impediment to experiencing an event? And obviously it is. When it clouds the movement of perception, knowledge becomes an impediment. So it's a two-edged sword. And the dynamic of it all is to be able to balance the use of this two-edged sword. Now, is it possible to balance these opposing movements? The usefulness of knowledge versus its interference with perception. This, it seems to me, is the challenge before human beings. And that is where holistic education and an appropriate upbringing of a human being has enormous importance and place to play. Now, we are able to see that human beings are essentially treated as commodities. The factory system sees a human being as a commodity, but it doesn't see the human being alone as a commodity. It sees everything in nature as a commodity to be used for its benefit and discarded when that use is over. Now, is it possible that a human being can treat everything in nature as a commodity and not treat the human being alone as a commodity? That doesn't happen. So that whole approach negates sensitivity towards anything outside of us and brings in this objective of utility. What use has this for me? That seems to be the underlying motive of entire human approach to living. So, at some point or the other, this existential question comes to a human being. What's the purpose of life at all? Knowledge can't answer that, but the question doesn't go away. And I think one of the things there that help or hinder is the cultural heritage in which a human being has been born and lived. So let me give two examples of this. The Indian tradition has always talked of the opportunity of human birth. It points out that human birth is very, very rare. The human birth is of extraordinary value because only the human being has an intellect which can discriminate. The human birth is the only route to break through the cycle of birth, death, next birth. And this is its primary purpose. And this is what it should be used for. If you look at Krishnamurti, there was a documentary produced called Challenge of Change. I think it was 1984. And at the end of that challenge, the question that Krishnamurti was asking was, if you see all this, why don't you change? Is that question any different from this traditional question of the human opportunity? No. Krishnamurti has also been misunderstood when it comes to his criticism of India and Indian culture. For example, particularly when it comes to these terms of tradition, belief, prayer, etc. He said in a talk, you mutter a lot of words, go to the temple, repeat some words which you call religious. Now, what an extraordinary weight of tradition the so-called spiritual leaders and saints have established in your minds. The Gita, the Upanishads, Shankara, and other interpreters of the Gita. These interpreters take their stand on the Gita and interpret, and you go on interpreting. And that interpretation you consider to be most extraordinary. And the one who interprets, you call a religious man. Right? But there are some other pieces from Krishnamurti which somewhere have not got highlighted. They are all part of the talks. But they haven't reached most of us. And here is a very interesting passage which Krishnamurti spoke in 1984 at the Rajghat talk. And he said, one of the strange things is, India is a very sad country, but there is always a smile. Haven't you noticed it? The poor smile. They are starving, they smile. No? And that is the miracle of this country. They are starving, downtrodden, no means of happiness. They are perpetually working. And yet, as you go by the street, especially in the country, they smile at you. This happens nowhere in the world. This is one of the great things of this country. Now, I don't know if you have come across this passage earlier, but it's not a criticism of India. It's pointing out to something that exists here, which doesn't exist elsewhere in the country. And we are in the middle of it. So the question that comes, why do the poor smile? And I would suggest, you can challenge me on this, I would suggest it's this cultural heritage, the legacy of it, in which they have been born in. Unconsciously, perhaps, through language and living, a lot of it has got inside. They may not be able to articulate it, but they have an intuitive understanding of this whole idea of karma, which is that you are the cause of whatever you have today. There is nobody else who is responsible for it. And you have to work out your causes. As you live today, so you are going to get the rewards tomorrow. Now, understanding the cause of a problem can help end the problem. And what is the root cause of problems seen with humans and human society? If we take that simile again of the clear pond, water in the pool and the bed of the sand and pebbles at the bottom always exist. They have always existed, they will always exist. It is the activity of thought intellect that obscures the bottom of the pond. So the problem is only the activity of thought intellect. Now, what is the cause of this problem? It's not the government, it's not the laws, it's not society. It is you and I, the educated individuals. We form the middle class, 69 to 80% of the population. We have confused information and knowledge with perception and understanding. And therefore, we run after information and knowledge. And to me, that is the problem. Until that misconception is cleared for oneself, the problem will continue to exist education will continue to go the way it is going or even more. Now, the really poor, they are able to smile. It's the middle class that is preoccupied with becoming, preoccupied with success, preoccupied with fear of failure, and therefore they are not able to smile. So our education, our lifestyle is enhancing this. Generation after generation, it's increasing, not reducing it. To me, this is the crisis that is actually we are faced with right in front of us. And what is it that we can do unless we first have that insight, understanding, perception in our own living? That's my question for that. Thank you.